The gunshot that shattered the Montana evening came not from any outlaw's revolver, but from Elizabeth Simmons' old shotgun as she defended her small homestead from the coyote threatening her chickens. A woman alone with a 4-year-old daughter had no choice but to be her own protection in the unforgiving territory of 1878. Her hands still trembled slightly as she lowered the weapon, scanning the twilight shadows for any further threats. "Mama, did you get him?" The small voice came from behind her where Abigail stood in the doorway, her threadbare nightgown fluttering in the evening breeze. The child's blonde curls matched her mother's, though Elizabeth's had long lost their luster, dulled by years of hardship. "Yes, sweetheart. The chickens are safe. Back inside now." Elizabeth ushered her daughter in, bolting the door behind them. The single-room cabin felt smaller each passing day, the walls closing in like the mounting problems that threatened to overwhelm her. 3 months since William had succumbed to fever. 3 months of struggling alone with dwindling supplies, mounting debts, and the weight of whispers from townsfolk who thought a widow had no business trying to maintain a homestead. Elizabeth lit the lone oil lamp, its glow casting long shadows across the rough-hewn floor. "Will you tell me a story, Mama?" Abigail climbed onto their shared bed, her eyes wide with expectation. "Just a short one tonight, little one. Tomorrow we must go to town." Elizabeth couldn't bring herself to tell her daughter that tomorrow would determine their fate. The bank wouldn't wait any longer. The small pouch of coins hidden in her dress pocket wouldn't be enough, but she had to try. As Abigail drifted to sleep, Elizabeth stared at the ceiling, mentally counting their possessions, wondering what else she could sell. The wedding ring had already gone. The horse was needed for the wagon. The chickens provided their only reliable food. Her father's pocket watch might fetch something, but it was Abigail's inheritance the only thing of value left to pass down. Morning came too quickly. Elizabeth dressed Abigail in her cleanest dress, attempting to smooth the child's wild curls into something presentable. "Why are you wearing your Sunday dress, Mama?" Abigail asked, watching her mother pin up her hair. "Because we're seeing important people today." Elizabeth forced a smile, tying a faded blue ribbon in her daughter's hair. "Remember what I told you about being quiet when grown-ups are talking?" Abigail nodded solemnly. Even at 4, she understood more than Elizabeth wished she did. The journey to Twin Pines took nearly 2 hours, the wagon rattling over rough terrain. The small settlement barely qualified as a town, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon, general store, bank, and a smattering of other establishments catering to the ranchers and miners in the region. Elizabeth steered their wagon toward the bank, her stomach nodding with each turn of the wheels. Mr. Patterson, the bank manager, had been cleared during her last visit. No more extensions. No more sympathy for a widow's plight. Business was business. "Wait here," she instructed Abigail, helping her down from the wagon. "I'll only be a few minutes." Inside the bank, the air felt stifling despite the early hour. Patterson's spectacles gleamed in the lamplight as he reviewed the documents spread before him, not bothering to look up when Elizabeth approached. "Mrs. Simmons." "Right on time." His voice carried no warmth. "Mr. Patterson," Elizabeth began, retrieving the small pouch from her pocket. "I've brought what I could gather. It's not the full amount, but if I could have just one more month." "Mrs. Simmons," he interrupted, finally meeting her gaze. "We've been through this. The bank has been more than generous given your circumstances." His eyes flicked briefly to the window where Abigail waited outside. "But charity has its limits. You've had 3 extensions already." Elizabeth placed the coins on the desk. "Please, I just need a little more time." Patterson counted the coins methodically, his expression souring. "This isn't even half of what's due." He sighed, removing his spectacles. "I've had an offer for your property. A fair one, considering its condition. I suggest you take it, Mrs. Simmons. A woman alone with a child has no business trying to run a homestead." "That land is all we have," Elizabeth said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "My husband worked himself to death clearing it, building our home, and left you with debts you cannot pay." Patterson's tone hardened. "Be reasonable. Take the offer. Use the money to return east to your family, or perhaps find suitable employment here in town. The saloon is always looking for help." The implication hung in the air between them. Elizabeth's cheeks burned with humiliation. I would rather die than leave my daughter alone while I serve drinks to men who can't keep their hands to themselves. Patterson shrugged. Then I suggest you find a husband quickly. You have until the end of the week to decide, Mrs. Simmons. After that, I'm afraid foreclosure proceedings will begin. Outside, Elizabeth blinked back tears, the bright Montana sunlight suddenly offensive in its cheerfulness. Abigail looked up expectantly. Can we get candy, Mama? Elizabeth forced another smile. Not today, sweetheart, but we need to visit the general store. Inside Donovan's general store, Elizabeth carefully selected only the barest essentials: flour, coffee, a small tin of sugar for Abigail's sake. Mrs. Donovan watched from behind the counter, her expression a mixture of pity and judgment. Elizabeth, the older woman called. Might I have a word? Reluctantly, Elizabeth approached the counter. Yes, Mrs. Donovan. I heard about your meeting with Patterson. News traveled fast in small towns. I just want to say, if you need work, my sister in Helena runs a respectable boarding house. She could use help with cooking and cleaning. She'd even let you bring the child. Thank you, Elizabeth replied stiffly, but we're not leaving our home. Mrs. Donovan lowered her voice. Be realistic, dear. That place is too much for you. And the child, she glanced at Abigail, who was admiring a porcelain doll in the display case. She needs stability, schooling. Things you can't provide out there alone. I'm managing just fine. Are you? Look at her dress patched twice over. And thin as a rail, both of you. Mrs. Donovan sighed. People talk, Elizabeth. They're saying it's selfish, keeping her out there. A burden on a child, growing up so isolated. No father, no prospects. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she counted out coins for her purchases. What I do with my daughter is no one's concern but mine. The offer stands, Mrs. Donovan said, wrapping the parcels. Just think about it. The weight of the town's judgment followed Elizabeth as she guided Abigail back to the wagon. They were nearly there when a commotion from the street drew their attention. A cattle drive unusual this close to town. The dusty herd moved slowly down the main street, guided by half a dozen cowboys on horseback. Look, Mama. Cows. Abigail clapped her hands in delight. Yes, sweetheart. Now come along. We need to. Elizabeth's words cut short as Abigail darted forward, fascinated by the animals, directly into the path of the oncoming herd. Elizabeth's heart stopped. Abigail, she screamed, lunging after her daughter. Time slowed. The cattle's thundering hooves, the shouts of the cowboys, her own pulse pounding in her ears all merged into a terrifying cacophony. Then, a blur of movement. A horse and rider breaking from the group, racing ahead of the herd. In one fluid motion, the rider leaned down, scooped Abigail from the ground, and pulled the horse to a sharp turn away from danger. Elizabeth reached them just as the rider dismounted, still holding Abigail securely. I think this little lady belongs to you, the man said, his voice deep and accented with the drawl of Texas or perhaps Louisiana. Mama, I rode a horse, Abigail exclaimed, seemingly unaware of the danger she'd been in. Elizabeth clutched her daughter to her chest, her legs weak with relief. Thank you, she managed, finally looking up at their rescuer. He stood tall, dust covered from the trail, his face partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat. When he tilted his head, she saw eyes the color of a summer sky, crinkling slightly at the corners. Samuel Fletcher, he introduced himself, tipping his hat. Trail boss for the Rocking J outfit. Elizabeth Simmons. And this is Abigail. She set her daughter down, but kept a firm grip on her hand. I don't know how to thank you properly, Mr. Fletcher. No need for thanks, madam. Any man would have done the same. His gaze lingered on Elizabeth's face a moment longer than necessary before shifting to Abigail. Quite the adventurer you've got there. Yes, with no sense of danger, Elizabeth said, her voice still shaking. One of the other cowboys rode up. Everything all right, Sam? Just fine, Pete. Little Miss here wanted to join the herd. Samuel's smile revealed a dimple in his left cheek beneath several days' growth of beard. You two heading somewhere? Might not be safe until we get these beeves through town. We were just returning to our wagon, Elizabeth explained, nodding toward the hitching post where their old mare waited patiently. Samuel frowned slightly. That's your rig? Heading out of town alone? We manage fine, Mr. Fletcher. Elizabeth's pride resurfaced. We live about 2 hours north of here. The old Simmons place? The other cowboy asked. Heard about that. You're the widow, then? Elizabeth stiffened. Yes. Samuel shot his companion a warning look. Pete, get back to the herd. I'll catch up. Once they were alone again, Samuel cleared his throat. Mrs. Simmons, I don't mean to presume, but that's rough country between here and your place. Maybe I could escort you partway? Once we get these cattle to the holding pens outside town, I could spare an hour. That's very kind, but unnecessary. Mama, can the cowboy come with us? Please. Abigail tugged at her skirt, looking up at Samuel with open admiration. Your mother's right, little lady. She knows the way home. Samuel knelt to Abigail's level. You be good for her, you hear? No more running at cattle. I promise, Abigail said solemnly. Samuel straightened, touching his hat brim again. Madam. He turned to go, then paused. If you don't mind my asking, what brings you to town today? Something in his direct gaze made Elizabeth answer honestly. Bank business. Not particularly successful bank business. Understanding flickered in his eyes. Tough times all around. The droughts hit everyone hard this year. He glanced at the general store. Were you able to get what you needed? What we could afford, Elizabeth replied, instantly regretting the admission. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Well, good day to you both. Safe travels. As he walked away, leading his horse, Abigail waved enthusiastically. Bye, Mr. Cowboy. He turned, offering a genuine smile and a wave of his own before mounting and riding back toward the cattle drive. Elizabeth helped Abigail into the wagon, her mind still replaying the near tragedy and their unexpected rescue. As she untied the reins, Mrs. Donovan emerged from the store, hurrying toward them. Elizabeth, wait. She thrust a small package into the wagon. A bit of candy for the little one, and some dried beef. On the house. Elizabeth hesitated, pride warring with necessity. Mrs. Donovan, I can't. You can and you will. The older woman insisted. That's the third time you've been in this month and bought less than you need. Take it. Thank you. Elizabeth finally said, tucking the package into her basket. As they pulled away from Twin Pines, Abigail happily sucking on a peppermint stick, Elizabeth's thoughts turned to the bank's ultimatum. 5 days to come up with money she didn't have, or lose everything. Mama, will the cowboy visit us? Abigail asked, breaking into her thoughts. No, sweetheart. He's just passing through with the cattle. But he was nice. And he saved me. Yes, he did. Elizabeth smiled softly. But cowboys don't stay in one place. They follow the herds. The rest of the journey passed in contemplative silence. Even Abigail seemed to sense her mother's troubled mood, content to watch the landscape roll by. When they finally crested the hill overlooking their small homestead, Elizabeth felt the familiar mix of pride and despair. The cabin looked smaller from here, more fragile against the vast Montana wilderness. A tendril of smoke rose from the chimney. Elizabeth pulled sharply on the reins, causing the wagon to jerk to a halt. Stay here, she whispered to Abigail, reaching for the rifle kept beneath the seat. What's wrong, Mama? Nothing, sweetheart. Just wait here. Elizabeth climbed down, rifle in hand, and approached the cabin cautiously. No one should be there. They had no neighbors for miles, and the door had been locked when they left. As she neared the porch, the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out, raising his hands when he saw the rifle. Whoa now, Mrs. Simmons. Just me. Samuel Fletcher stood on her porch, looking slightly sheepish. Mr. Fletcher? Elizabeth lowered the rifle, bewilderment replacing fear. What are you doing here? How did you? I took a shortcut. Know these hills pretty well from previous drives. He gestured to the cabin. Hope you don't mind. I fixed that loose step on your porch. Was about to start on the roof leak I noticed. Elizabeth stared, speechless. In the wagon, Abigail squealed with delight. The cowboy came, Mama. He came. Samuel chuckled, his expression softening at the child's enthusiasm. Couldn't let two ladies fend for themselves with a storm brewing. He pointed west, where dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Those look mean. Thought I'd make sure your roof was sound. But, the cattle drive. Pete can handle it for a day. I'll catch up. He studied her face. Unless you'd rather I leave? I know it's presumptuous, showing up uninvited. Elizabeth should send him away. A strange man at her home, no matter how helpful, would only fuel the town's gossip. But the approaching storm, the loose shingles she'd been meaning to fix, and the simple relief of having another adult present all conspired against proper judgment. "The roof does leak," she conceded. Samuel's smile brightened his entire face. "Then I'd better get to it before that rain hits. Got some supplies from my saddlebag, but if you have extra nails—" In the shed, Elizabeth helped Abigail down from the wagon. "We should get the chickens in and the horse settled first." "Already took care of your chickens, madam. Let me handle the horse and wagon. You two get inside before the wind picks up." As Samuel unloaded their meager purchases and tended to the horse, Elizabeth stood watching, a strange feeling settling in her chest. Not since William fell ill had anyone offered help without expectation or judgment. Inside, she found more surprises. The woodbox, nearly empty when they left, now overflowed with split logs. The floor had been swept, and a pot of something savory simmered on the stove. "Did Mr. Fletcher do all this?" she wondered aloud. "Smells good," Abigail said, peering into the pot. "Can we eat it?" "We'll ask Mr. Fletcher when he comes in. For now, let's get you changed." Elizabeth helped her daughter into play clothes, her mind whirling with questions. When Samuel finally entered, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air, he removed his hat respectfully. "Roof's patched best I could. Should hold through this storm at least. Mr. Fletcher, I don't know what to say. You've done so much already." He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Noticed a few things needed fixing. Hope you don't mind about the stew. Had some rabbit I trapped earlier. Figured it would go further with the vegetables in your garden." "You trapped a rabbit, fixed our roof, chopped wood, and made supper?" Elizabeth couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. "Why?" Samuel considered her question seriously. "Honest answer, I've been on the trail 3 months. Cooking over a campfire, sleeping on hard ground, smelling like cattle and dust." His eyes crinkled with humor. "Chance to do something normal, helpful, well, it's selfish really. Makes me feel human again." The simple honesty of his answer disarmed her. "Will you stay for supper then?" "It seems only fair since you caught and cooked it." "I'd be honored, madam." The storm broke just as they finished the meal. Rain lashed against the windows, wind howling through the trees surrounding the small clearing. Samuel had entertained Abigail with stories of trail drives and distant places, the child hanging on his every word. "Doesn't look like it's letting up," Elizabeth observed, clearing the dishes. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm afraid, call me Samuel, please. Or Sam." After sharing a meal, Mr. Fletcher seems too formal. Elizabeth nodded. "Samuel, the storm. You won't be able to catch up with your outfit tonight. I suspected as much." He glanced toward the door. "I can sleep in your shed, if you're comfortable with that. Or make camp under the overhang." "Nonsense. You've done us a great service today. I can make a pallet here by the fire." Samuel looked about to protest, then seemed to think better of it. "Much obliged." After Elizabeth put Abigail to bed behind the curtain that separated their sleeping area from the main room, she returned to find Samuel studying the documents she'd left on the small table, the bank notices. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "Didn't mean to pry. Just saw the bank's letterhead." Elizabeth should have been angry at the invasion of privacy, but found she wasn't. "It's no secret. The whole town knows our situation." "Foreclosure?" His voice was gentle, without judgment. Elizabeth nodded, sinking into the chair across from him. "William took out a loan to expand the homestead. Had big dreams, orchards, more cattle, maybe even hiring help someday." She traced the wood grain of the table. "Then the fever came. 3 weeks, and he was gone. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine empathy. "The bank wants payment in full by week's end, or they'll take everything." Samuel frowned. "How much?" $216. The sum felt enormous, impossible. "And if you had it, could you manage here? You and the little one?" Elizabeth straightened. "We were doing fine before William got sick. The garden produces well. We have chickens. I can hunt when necessary." Pride colored her voice. "I'm not some delicate flower who needs rescuing, Samuel. Just time and fair treatment." "Never thought you were delicate, madam. Just asking practical questions." His eyes held respect, not pity. "What does the bank want you to do?" "Sell to their preferred buyer. For less than it's worth. Move to town, find suitable employment." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "Or remarry quickly. Apparently, a woman alone with a child is a burden on herself and society." Samuel's expression darkened. "That's horseshit, pardon my language." You're doing what any mother would, protecting your home and child. The vehemence of his defense surprised her. You seem to have strong opinions on the matter. My mother raised 4 boys alone after my father died in the war. Ran the family store, kept us fed and clothed, made sure we learned our letters. He smiled at the memory. Anyone who called her children a burden would have met the business end of her broom. Elizabeth laughed softly, the sound feeling foreign in her throat. I'd like to have met her. You remind me of her. Same determination. Samuel leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Mrs. Simmons, Elizabeth, she corrected. If I'm to call you Samuel. Elizabeth. He said her name carefully, as though testing its feel. I might have a proposition for you. A business proposition, he added quickly. The outfit I'm with, we're delivering cattle to Fort Harrison. Army contract. But we've been hired to return with supplies for some of the new settlements north of here. And Elizabeth prompted when he paused. And we'll be coming back this way in about 2 weeks. I've been looking to leave the trail, settle somewhere. Put my savings into something stable. He gestured around the cabin. A place like this has good bones. Good land. Just needs work and capital. Elizabeth tensed. Are you offering to buy us out too? No, madam. I'm suggesting a partnership. Samuel leaned forward earnestly. I've got money saved. Enough to clear your debt, with some left over for improvements. In exchange for half interest in the property and business. Half interest. Elizabeth repeated, bewildered. You'd retain ownership of the cabin itself. I'd build my own place nearby. We'd work the land together, share the profits. You'd have help with the heavy work, security, and maintain your independence. I'd have a stake in something permanent. He spread his hands. Just a thought. Elizabeth's mind raced. Why would you do this? You don't know us. I know enough. Samuel's gaze was steady. I know you're fighting for your home. I know that little girl deserves a chance to grow up where her father built something. And I know I'm 32 years old and tired of having nothing to show for it, but saddle sores and trail dust. Outside, thunder crashed, punctuating his words. What happens when you want to marry? Start your own family? Elizabeth asked. A shadow crossed his face. Lost that chance years ago. The woman I thought I'd marry chose differently while I was away fighting. After that, he shrugged. The trail became home. Elizabeth rose, needing distance to think clearly. This was madness. A business arrangement with a man she'd known less than a day. Yet something about Samuel Fletcher inspired trust. His straightforward manner. The way he'd helped without being asked. How he'd looked at Abigail not as a burden, but as a child worth protecting. I need time to consider, she finally said. This isn't a decision to make hastily. Samuel nodded. Of course. I'll be back through in 2 weeks. That gives you time to think. He stood, moving toward the fire. For now, let's just say I'm a neighbor lending a hand during a storm. Elizabeth prepared his bedding near the hearth, acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, yet grateful not to face the night alone with the tempest raging outside. As she retired behind the curtain where Abigail slept peacefully, she found herself unable to dismiss Samuel's proposition outright. A partnership. Independence maintained. Help when needed. It was more than she'd dared hope for. Morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having passed during the night. Elizabeth rose early, finding Samuel already outside, splitting more firewood. Through the window, she watched him work, his movements efficient and practiced. Not a drifter or an opportunist, she decided, but a man accustomed to hard work. Over a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the precious sugar from town, Samuel outlined his plans. I'll settle things with the outfit, collect my wages at Fort Harrison, then head back. Should be here by the 15th or 16th. He hesitated. If you decide against my offer, no hard feelings. I'll move on. And if I accept? Elizabeth asked, still uncertain. Then I'll go to the bank immediately, settle the debt. We can draw up papers with proper terms. His expression grew serious. One thing I want clear, Elizabeth. This would be a true partnership. I wouldn't be taking over or giving orders. Your knowledge of this place is as valuable as my contribution. After breakfast, Samuel prepared to leave, checking his saddle and gear thoroughly before mounting. Abigail clung to Elizabeth's skirts, watching sadly. Do you have to go, Mr. Cowboy? She asked. Samuel knelt to her level. Afraid so, little lady. Got people counting on me. But I might be back, if your mama decides she could use a neighbor. We never had a neighbor, Abigail said thoughtfully. Would you come for supper sometimes? If invited. Samuel glanced up at Elizabeth, something unspoken passing between them. Safe travels, Samuel, Elizabeth said, extending her hand. He took it, his calloused palm warm against hers. 2 weeks, he reminded her. Whatever you decide. As he rode away, Elizabeth felt a curious mixture of anticipation and apprehension. 2 weeks to decide their future. 2 weeks to determine if Samuel Fletcher was the answer to her prayers or simply another complication. The days that followed took on a strange quality, both dragging endlessly and passing too quickly. Elizabeth threw herself into work, tending the garden with renewed vigor, mending clothing too long neglected, even attempting some of the smaller repairs Samuel had noted needed attention. Each night, she weighed her options. Sell to the bank's buyer and move to town, where she'd face constant judgment and limited prospects. Accept Samuel's offer and maintain her home, but with the uncertainty of a partnership with a man she barely knew. Or somehow find another solution before the bank's deadline. On the 4th day, Elizabeth hitched the wagon and drove to town, Abigail chattering excitedly beside her. Not to the bank this time, but to the telegraph office. A last, desperate attempt. I need to send a message to Chicago, she told the operator. To my brother, Benjamin Simmons. The reply came the following day, delivered by the operator's son, who rode out specially. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she read the brief message. Impossible to send funds, stop business, failing, stop, suggest, selling property, stop, bring Abigail, east, stop, Benjamin, her last hope extinguished. Elizabeth faced the inevitable. The bank would foreclose tomorrow. She had no choice but to accept whatever terms they offered and leave the home she and William had built together. Unless she accepted Samuel Fletcher's proposition. A man she'd known for one day. A cowboy with no ties to the community. It was madness. And yet, something in her responded to his directness, his respect for her situation. The way he'd looked at her not with pity or disdain, but with genuine admiration. The morning of the bank's deadline dawned clear and cool. Elizabeth dressed with care, selecting her best dress. The one she'd worn to church before William's illness made the journey impossible. She braided and pinned her hair neatly, determined to face Patterson with dignity. Are we going to town again, Mama? Abigail asked, watching her preparations. Yes, sweetheart. Important business. Will we see the cowboy? Elizabeth smiled sadly. No, not today. In town, the bank seemed particularly imposing, its fresh paint and glass windows a stark contrast to the weathered buildings surrounding it. Elizabeth squared her shoulders and entered, Abigail's small hand clutched in hers. Patterson looked up from his desk, unsurprised. Mrs. Simmons, I was beginning to wonder if you'd come. I'm here to discuss terms, Elizabeth said, her voice steadier than she felt. Excellent. I've prepared the paperwork for the sale. Mr. Henderson's offer stands at $175. After settling your debt, you'll have a small sum to establish yourself elsewhere. He pushed a document forward. If you'll just sign here. Elizabeth stared at the paper. Henderson's name already filled in as the new owner of the land she and William had loved. $175 for 3 years of backbreaking work. For William's grave beneath the oak tree. For Abigail's birthplace. Mr. Patterson, the bank door swung open, the bell jangling loudly. Elizabeth turned, her polite refusal dying on her lips. Samuel Fletcher stood in the doorway, trailed dust coating his clothes, his hat pushed back on his head. His gaze found hers immediately, a question in his blue eyes. Mr. Fletcher. The name escaped her before she could think better of it. Mrs. Simmons. He approached, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Hoped I might find you here. Patterson looked between them, confusion evident. Sir, we're conducting private business. Samuel ignored him, focusing entirely on Elizabeth. I rode hard to get here. Thought I might be too late. You said 2 weeks, Elizabeth whispered. Couldn't wait that long. His eyes dropped to the document on the desk, then back to her face. Have you decided? About my proposition? Patterson cleared his throat loudly. Excuse me, but Mrs. Simmons is about to sign over her property to a legitimate buyer. If you have business with the bank, you'll need to wait. Samuel finally acknowledged the banker. My business is with Mrs. Simmons. He turned back to her. Elizabeth, I meant what I said. A true partnership. But there's something I didn't tell you. Elizabeth felt her heart constrict. What? When I helped you that day, saw you with your daughter, fighting so hard to keep your home. He took a deep breath. It wasn't just about a business opportunity. Something about you, your courage, your determination. I couldn't stop thinking about you both. Patterson stood abruptly. This is most irregular. Mrs. Simmons, if you're not ready to sign, I'm ready to pay her debt in full, Samuel interrupted, reaching into his coat and withdrawing a leather pouch. $216 plus interest. The banker's eyes widened. Mr. Henderson can find another property, Samuel said firmly. He turned back to Elizabeth. I'm not asking for an answer about the partnership right now. Just let me clear the debt. Give yourself time to decide without this hanging over your head. Elizabeth stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. Why would you do this without assurance of repayment? Because some things are worth the risk. His gaze held hers. And I've never met anyone more worth taking a chance on than you, Elizabeth Simmons. Abigail tugged at Samuel's coat. Did you come back to be our neighbor, Mr. Cowboy? Samuel knelt down, his expression softening. That depends on your mama, little lady. Elizabeth looked between her daughter's hopeful face, Samuel's earnest eyes, and Patterson's bewildered expression. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. Mr. Patterson, she said firmly, I will not be selling today. If Mr. Fletcher is willing to clear our debt, please prepare the necessary receipts. Patterson sputtered, but Henderson will need to find another property, Elizabeth finished, echoing Samuel's words. She turned to the cowboy. I accept your help, Samuel. And I'm inclined to accept your partnership offer as well. But I'll need those 2 weeks to be certain. Samuel's smile illuminated his entire face. Fair enough. An hour later, the debt settled and paperwork completed, Elizabeth stepped out of the bank into the bright Montana sunshine. Beside her, Samuel carried Abigail on his shoulders, the child giggling with delight. I still can't believe you came back early, Elizabeth said as they walked toward the general store. You must have ridden day and night. Near enough, Samuel admitted. Left the outfit at Fort Harrison, explained the situation to the boss. He understood. Said good hands are always needed, but good homes are harder to come by. And your wages? Samuel patted his coat. Right here. Enough to clear your debt and get started on improvements. Thought we might stop at Donovan's, get supplies we'll need. We? Elizabeth questioned, one eyebrow raised. Figure of speech, he backtracked, looking chastened. You decide how to spend it. It's your home. It might be our partnership, she corrected gently. Though I'm still considering the terms. In the general store, Mrs. Donovan's eyes widened seeing them enter together, Abigail still perched on Samuel's shoulders. The older woman's expression cycled rapidly from shock to speculation to knowing satisfaction. Mrs. Simmons, she greeted. And who might this be? Samuel Fletcher, madam. Samuel introduced himself, setting Abigail down carefully. Just helping Mrs. Simmons with some purchases. I see. Mrs. Donovan's tone suggested she saw far more than that. Shopping for the homestead today? Yes, Elizabeth confirmed. We'll need quite a bit. Seeds, tools, perhaps some fabric. As they moved through the store, selecting necessities and a few small luxuries, Elizabeth was acutely aware of the whispers, the glances. By tomorrow, the entire territory would know a cowboy had paid her debts and was now buying supplies alongside her. People are talking, she murmured to Samuel as he loaded their purchases into the wagon. Let them, he replied simply. Nothing improper in a business arrangement. Is that all this is? The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Samuel paused, a sack of flour balanced on his shoulder. That's all it needs to be, if that's what you want. His eyes met hers. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hoping for more eventually. When you're ready. If you're ever ready. The honesty of his answer touched something deep within her. I lost my husband less than a year ago. I'm not, I know. And I respect that. Samuel finished loading the wagon. I'm not asking for anything now except the chance to prove myself a good partner. The rest can wait. However long it takes. Elizabeth studied him. This man who'd ridden for days to reach her before the deadline. Who spoke of partnership and respect when others saw only a woman's weakness. We should get back before dark, she said finally. I'll need to show you where you might build your cabin. Samuel's face brightened with cautious hope. Does that mean, it means I'm still considering, Elizabeth clarified. though her decision was already solidifying. But I'm willing to discuss specifics while I consider. The journey home felt different with Samuel riding alongside the wagon, occasionally pointing out wildlife or interesting features of the landscape to an enthralled Abigail. His presence changed the familiar route, making it feel safer, less isolated. At the homestead, Samuel immediately set to work unloading supplies and caring for the animals while Elizabeth prepared a simple supper. The domesticity of the scene struck her how easily he fit into the rhythms of the place, anticipating needs, respecting boundaries. After Abigail was tucked into bed, they sat at the table with paper and pencil, outlining terms for their potential partnership. Equal shares in the property except the cabin itself. Joint decisions on major expenditures. A separate dwelling for Samuel within sight, but allowing privacy. And if either of us wishes to dissolve the arrangement? Elizabeth asked. Samuel considered carefully. First right of purchase to the remaining partner at fair market value. Or we sell and split the proceeds equally. And if you marry someday, your wife might not want such an arrangement. Any woman I'd consider marrying would understand and respect our partnership. His gaze held steady. And if I did marry, we'd renegotiate terms that work for everyone. By lamplight, they drafted a simple agreement. Not legally binding yet, but a framework for what could be. When they finished, Samuel set the pencil down with a look of satisfaction. I should go? It's late. Elizabeth walked him to the door. The shed is prepared, if you'd like to stay tonight. It's a long ride back to town. Thank you. I'll head out at first light tomorrow, start gathering materials for my cabin. He hesitated at the threshold. Elizabeth, whatever you decide about the partnership, I want you to know something. What I saw today, how Patterson dismissed you, how the townsfolk whispered, it made my blood boil. It's the way of things, she said resignedly. It shouldn't be. His voice held quiet intensity. They called your child a burden, said you couldn't manage alone. But they're wrong. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Elizabeth felt tears threatening. Some days I don't feel strong at all. Those are the days partners help carry the load. Samuel's hand lifted, almost touching her cheek before dropping away. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Samuel. The 2 weeks Samuel had originally promised stretched into the most transformative period of Elizabeth's life since William's death. True to his word, Samuel began construction on a small cabin 100 yards from the main house, close enough for security, far enough for propriety. Each day brought new changes. Fences mended, garden expanded, roof properly repaired. Samuel hired 2 local men to help with the heavier work, paying fair wages and insisting they treat Elizabeth with the same respect they showed him. Through it all, Elizabeth watched him with Abigail, with the workers, with the decisions that affected their shared future. He consulted her on everything, valuing her knowledge of the land and its peculiarities. Never once did he attempt to override her wishes or assert authority based on his gender. In the evenings, when work was done and Abigail asleep, they would sit on the porch and talk. About his years on the trail. About her life with William. About books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they still harbored. Slowly, cautiously, Elizabeth found herself looking forward to these conversations. To the sound of his laugh. To the way his eyes crinkled when Abigail said something particularly precocious. To the feeling of safety his presence provided without diminishing her independence. 2 weeks became a month. Samuel's cabin took shape, sturdy and well-built. The partnership agreement, formally drawn up by the town lawyer, sat signed and witnessed in the metal box beneath Elizabeth's bed. Their arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but as the homestead visibly improved and prospered, criticism gradually gave way to grudging respect. On a warm evening in late June, they sat on the porch after a particularly productive day. A new milk cow had been delivered, the first of what would eventually become a small herd. Samuel had spent hours building a proper stall in the barn, while Elizabeth had shown Abigail how to approach the gentle animal. She takes to farming naturally, Samuel observed, watching through the window as Abigail slept. Smart as a whip, that one. She's thriving, Elizabeth agreed. Having you here, it's made a difference for her. She needs more than just me. You'd have managed, Samuel said with certainty. But I'm glad to help. Elizabeth studied his profile in the fading light. Why haven't you built a life before now, Samuel? A home, family. He was silent for a long moment. After Martha the woman, I mentioned I threw myself into wandering. Cattle drives, ranch work, even some mining. Told myself I was saving for something important. He shrugged. Truth is, I was hiding. Easier to keep moving than risk putting down roots and losing them. What changed? His eyes met hers. I saw you that day in town, fighting for your home, even when everyone told you to give up. Made me wonder what I was running from. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, coyotes called to one another beneath a rising moon. Samuel, Elizabeth began hesitantly, these past weeks. The partnership is working well. Better than I hoped, he agreed. Your knowledge of the land, my experience with livestock, we make a good team. We do. Elizabeth gathered her courage. But I've been thinking about something else. Something beyond the partnership. Samuel went very still. Oh, Abigail adores you. And I. She faltered, then pressed on. I've grown to care for you. More than I expected. More than just a business partner. Elizabeth. His voice came low, almost reverent. Are you saying? I'm saying I might be ready. Not immediately, but soon. To consider something more between us. She met his gaze steadily. If that's still something you want. Samuel moved closer on the bench, slowly enough that she could pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he gently took her hand in his. It's all I've thought about since the day I met you, he admitted. But I never wanted to push. Never wanted you to feel obligated because of the partnership or what I did at the bank. This has nothing to do with obligation, Elizabeth assured him. It's about who you are, how you see me not as someone to rescue, but as someone to stand beside. Samuel's free hand rose to her cheek, his touch feather-light. May I? He whispered. Elizabeth nodded, closing her eyes as his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When they parted, she felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the summer evening. We should take this slowly, she said softly. For Abigail's sake. And mine. We have all the time in the world, Samuel agreed, his smile illuminating the growing darkness. I'm not going anywhere. Autumn brought harvest time, the garden yielding bountifully after Samuel's improvements to the irrigation system. The small herd of cattle he'd acquired thrived on the northern pasture. Elizabeth's preserves lined the shelves, colorful jars of security against the coming winter. Their relationship progressed with careful deliberation. Samuel courted her properly, with small gifts and gestures of thoughtfulness. Wildflowers on the table, a wooden toy horse for Abigail, carved by his own hands. Sunday rides to the church in Twin Pines, where the minister greeted them with growing warmth as their attendance became regular. Town attitudes had shifted markedly. Where once there had been whispers of impropriety, now there were invitations to socials, offers to trade goods and services. The Simmons Fletcher homestead was becoming known for quality stock and fair dealings. Patterson, the banker, had been particularly transformed, approaching them after church one Sunday with a proposition for expanding their operation with favorable loan terms. Remarkable how his tune changed, Elizabeth observed as they drove home. Samuel laughed. Amazing what a little success will do. Though I don't think we need his money. We're doing fine on our own terms. By the first snowfall, Samuel's cabin stood complete, but largely unused. More often than not, he spent evenings at the main house, reading to Abigail or discussing plans with Elizabeth, departing reluctantly when propriety demanded. The first heavy snow of December confined them indoors for 3 days. Samuel trudged through drifts to care for the animals, then joined them by the fire, teaching Abigail checkers while Elizabeth sewed. On the evening of the third day, after Abigail had been tucked into bed with promises of sledding when the weather cleared, Elizabeth found Samuel standing at the window, watching the snowfall in the lantern light. Penny for your thoughts, she said, joining him. Just thinking how different this winter is from my last 20. He turned to her. How different everything is. How right it feels. Elizabeth leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. I never thought I'd feel this way again. After William died, I believed that part of my life was over. And now? Samuel's arm encircled her waist. Now I'm grateful. For second chances. For you. She looked up at him. I love you, Samuel. I think I have for months now. The joy that spread across his face was answer enough, but his words followed swiftly. I love you too, Elizabeth. More than I knew it was possible to love someone. He kissed her then, more deeply than before, years of loneliness dissolving between them. When they parted, breathless, Samuel pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me. Not someday, not eventually. Soon. I want us to be a family, you, me, Abigail." "Yes," Elizabeth answered without hesitation. "Yes." They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in Twin Pines, Abigail serving as flower girl, her excitement nearly overwhelming her solemn duties. Mrs. Donovan wept openly, declaring she'd known all along they were meant for each other. Even Patterson attended, bringing a silver serving dish as a wedding gift. After the simple ceremony and celebration, they returned to the homestead, their homestead now in truth as well as law. Samuel carried Abigail, sleeping from the excitement, into the house while Elizabeth lit the lamps and stoked the fire against the winter chill. When he returned from settling the child, he found Elizabeth standing in the center of the room, snowflakes melting in her hair from their journey home. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, the name new and precious on his tongue. "Welcome home." "Home," Elizabeth repeated, taking his outstretched hand. "It feels more like home now than it ever has." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Elizabeth traced the contours of his face with gentle fingers. "Do you remember what you said that first day? When Mrs. Donovan told you they called my child a burden?" Samuel's arm tightened around her. "I remember. You said, 'Then I'll carry them both.' And you have, Samuel. Not by taking over or making me dependent, but by standing beside us, sharing the load. Best decision I ever made," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Coming back for you both." Spring arrived with new beginnings. The homestead flourished under their combined care. Samuel's unused cabin had been repurposed as a cheese house, where Elizabeth experimented with recipes that were quickly gaining reputation in the surrounding communities. On a warm May morning, as wildflowers carpeted the meadow and new calves wobbled beside their mothers, Elizabeth placed Samuel's hand on her still flat abdomen, watching his eyes widen with realization. "Really?" he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Really?" She smiled up at him. "By winter, Abigail will have a brother or sister." Samuel gathered her close, his joy too profound for words. Nearby, Abigail played with the wooden animals he'd carved for her, enacting elaborate stories beneath the oak tree where, one day soon, they would tell her about the baby coming to join their family. From the porch, Elizabeth surveyed their domain, the green fields, the sturdy barn, the thriving garden. The land that had almost been lost now supported them abundantly. The partnership that began as a business arrangement had blossomed into so much more. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, joining her, his arms sliding naturally around her waist. "About burdens," she replied, leaning into him. "And how sometimes what seems heaviest becomes our greatest blessing." Samuel's hand covered hers where it rested on her abdomen. "No burdens here," he said softly. "Just treasures. And I'll spend my life carrying them all."